Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the support closing out 2023. First, we have an announcement. We want to, build a sense of community among all of our viewers and subscribers. Sometime early 2024, we will be launching our Discord server where everyone can talk about NBA news, react to games, etc. That'll be on the way. And before we get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for short form content and updates.
And also, just another report update. We have a new sign in the back, of our, of one of our, quote unquote studios, right?
Yes, sir.
Just to continue, to show, that we really are trying to build something here in
Yeah.
terms of, like a strong, network community channel. So
Exactly.
we continue to appreciate all the like and support. But, to kick things off, we finally have a big trade, to announce. It's kind of funny because a lot of times you don't normally see trades like this until you get to, December or not December, like January, or even not even January, usually February, close to the deadline.
Right.
Usually like the week or so before. But this time we ended up having a couple of teams deciding to make, a trade now, and that was the Raptors and the Knicks. So OG Anunoby, who we've been talking about for a long time, was finally traded. He was traded to the New York Knicks, actually, in a package that included him as well as point guard Malachi Flynn and Precious Achua, right? Both Raptors. Precious Achua is a big. And they are headed to the Knicks for R.J. Barrett, right? Emmanuel Quickly, and a second-round pick in 2024 for the Knicks. So it's kind of funny with these type of trades because when it was first announced initially, because a lot of times when these trades are talked about and reported, right, they're reported sort of in parts. So when it was first announced, I wasn't really like a huge fan of it because it felt like that New York was giving up, that New York was giving up a lot. Because it said, it just said R.J. Barrett quickly and draft compensation. So that could
Right.
mean anything. That could mean multiple firsts. It could mean, protected first. It could mean seconds. But then as more stuff was coming out, I was like, oh, okay, now, it sounds a lot better where it's like a trade that I think is relatively, balanced in terms of I think both teams should be relatively happy with it. I guess we'll start from the Knicks perspective, where, you get a guy that I think is probably just a better fit, overall, in comparison to, RJ Barrett, who's a good player, but I just think, with him and Randall, both guys are guys that like to play with the ball. They like to play downhill. They're kind of spotty, streaky outside shooters. Their preference is to slash. And I just think, on a team where you already have Brunson, who can do a lot of that as well, even though he can also shoot. It's just nice to kind of have a little bit more floor balance. And I think having a guy like OG who can defend well, but also hit outside shots at a pretty good rate. I just think that that's something that the Knicks really just needed. Because they've had stretches, where they've actually been a top 10 offense for most of the year. It's just, come playoff time, there's probably going to be some issues just because, you know, um, at a certain point, right, just some of these guys are just kind of going to run out of steam. And because some of these guys are not great outside shooters, so teams are going to play them that way. But now you get a guy who's a 37% career 3-point shooter. I never thought that he was going to go for what was always reported, where they were talking about, 3, 4, 5 first round picks. It just never made a lot of sense because he's a good player, but he's
Right.
not, like a guy where you give up all of that to get him. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
he's just not, right? He's a good player that can help a lot of teams, but he's not, like a superstar, right? Like, like Rudy Gobert going for 5 firsts, versus like OG Anunoby going for like 3, 4 firsts. That just, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So,
Sure.
and I know last season, right, it was reported, right? Teams like Memphis and Golden State were interested. I think some of those teams offered multiple firsts and Toronto turned it down. Um, but in the end, right, for the Knicks, you made a move that I think is an upgrade at that spot. I do feel like it's probably the first in maybe a series of other moves where they acquire an additional person. Just because again, like it feels like you're not going to just do this and then that's it. I think there's probably another move coming, maybe one where you're throwing in some of the other guys that are under contract that you'd like to move, like an Evan Fournier or other players on the roster. But it's a good first step. I'm assuming obviously they're gonna, they traded for him. They're gonna re-sign him. Reportedly, he said he's okay with not getting 40 million a year, I guess. Which that's a lot of money for him.
Yeah.
Um, but either way, like from the Knicks perspective, I think this makes a lot of sense. And also like with Emmanuel Quickly, right? He was in the last year of his rookie contract. You were gonna have to pay him, and then you'd start talking about a really expensive roster, for a team that probably doesn't have like a super high ceiling in terms of probably not much further than the second round, like last year. But now you kind of get to reset and you have a chance to pull off something else. You still have picks, you still have some other contracts you can move. So I think that puts them in a really good spot. And then when you go to the Raptors, right, I think, this this is a solid job in terms of being able to get something back for a guy that probably wasn't going to stay, right? Just considering he had been in so many rumors, he was in the last year of his deal, or I guess he had a player option, but he was going to opt out of it. It just felt like he was probably going to go elsewhere. And so the Raptors did the right thing this time, unlike last year where they traded him and got something back. You got RJ Barrett, who's a good young player, right? He's from Canada, so I guess he's, kind of having a homecoming of
Yeah.
sorts. You got Emmanuel Quickly, right, who's a solid guard, and he can probably fit in well next to Scotty Barnes. As like compared to Dennis Schroeder, who's fine, but he's not a good outside shooter. I think he's just a different type of player. So I think overall, from the Toronto standpoint, I'm assuming they're also going to look at probably down the road trading Siakam. So if you get decent returns for both of those guys, I think that's pretty good, and then you can kind of be in a position where like I guess you can still quote unquote remain competitive. You're probably not going to be great, but you'll just have more young talent to work with as opposed to like this version of the team where like, some of your core guys that you have right now, other than Barnes, are a little bit older. And so now, whereas with RJ Barrett, he's like what, 23?
Mm-hmm.
Emmanuel Quickly, how old is he? Like 21,
20,
2, 3?
21. I think he might be 21.
Yeah, exactly. So he's a young guy. So it just allows you to kind of be in a better spot than you were before, where you have more young talent to work with. So I think personally, this is kind of a win-win trade for both teams. I mean, maybe you might quibble around in terms of who you think it's better a little bit more for, but I think both teams should be pretty satisfied.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's definitely a win-win, especially if you look at it from the Raptors' point of view. They got rid of OG, and it's like OG is a great player, but system-wise, I mean, I guess it worked somewhat, but at the same time, if you're not really winning a lot, then I guess I do understand the move. But I really like it from New York's point of view as well, because I think with RJ, this was kind of something that we expected as well. Like I think a lot of people expected RJ to be moved, because I think the thing with him is like he was playing fairly well before Brunson got there. I think, but once Brunson kind of got there, could kind of sense that they were moving. They wanted to move on from some of the guys that they initially were building the team around. So now that is completely Brunson's team. He's the lead guard for that team, lead player, of course. So I think, having a guy like OG Anunoby definitely helps New York, because, now they'll have a two-way guy. And I think, missing Mitchell Robinson does hurt, but you do gain some defense with OG Anunoby for sure. So that will help. And then obviously, the kick-out potential is going to be there for Jalen Brunson. Easy, kickouts where he can just hit OG Anunoby in the corner or even from the hash, somewhere like that. So I think there's a lot of potential for this. I'm just happy to see Toronto somewhat taking the first step in a rebuild. I know their rebuild's probably going to look a little bit different than other teams because, they do have Scotty Barnes, who I think we all know is going to be one of their franchise cornerstones at least. So I think we're just waiting on them to move Siakam and some other pieces maybe. But, yeah, I think it's a win-win for sure. And then, the Knicks got Precious Achiuwa as well, so adds to the big man depth. He's not like one of the elite defenders in the NBA, but, I think it does add some big man depth for, the Knicks, who don't even have Mitchell Robinson. So that's tough. But, I think it is interesting with Quickly. Do we think he's going to start? Do you think he is?
I would assume so, because I mean, before I think the last game or so, Schroeder was moved to the bench in a 6-man role. So I'm assuming they're gonna, let Quickly probably start and get some opportunities, because I'm assuming he's also looking to get paid, and it'll be a little bit harder to do that if he's coming off the bench.
Yeah, and it's like even last year, if we look at his numbers when he was a starter, he only I think started 21 games, but in those 21 games, 22 points. 5 rebounds, 5 assists, so pretty well balanced attack. And he can shoot the ball. That's the main thing. So, and actually, I think Quickly's 24, so that's interesting.
Yep.
But
all right, so yeah, he's older than I thought.
yeah, but
Either way, he's not old. Like he's
exactly.
still a guy, but like
and that's the thing.
Even if you give him a 4 or 5 year deal. Like, that's fine.
And that's the thing. I like it because, I mean, we're seeing a lot of young talent be circulated between both these teams. So that's really good. I think the returns are good for both teams. Like you said initially, I was like, yikes, that's a fleece low key. But I don't think it is now, looking at the full details, like you said. And then I think with Barrett, this could be a potential place where he can kind of, I guess, kickstart his career once again. I think there's probably going to be more shots for him in Toronto because I think, the issue was in New York, like I said, was Jalen Brunson is such a high volume player, needs the ball in his hands a lot. So that takes away some shots from some guys who aren't really spot up guys. So I think, maybe RJ Barrett being on Toronto will help him with his creative bag and whatnot. Because I think before Brunson got there, he averaged a career high 20 points. So I don't know. We'll see what happens, but I do like it for both teams, and it came as a surprise. I wasn't really expecting this this early at all.
Yeah, no, because again, like I said in the past, normally a lot of these trades don't happen until we get closer to the deadline. So, good on these teams, I guess, for, kind of deciding, to get this done early. Oftentimes, I guess the reason why they don't do it early is because usually the asking prices are a lot higher, but I guess the
Sure.
Knicks were comfortable, with, you know, uh, with doing that. And, like with Quickly, it's interesting, right? Because his points per game is up, from last year by a little bit, but he's playing like 5 less minutes,
Yeah.
right? So you already know, like, if he's playing 5 less minutes a game, right, something's going on there. And again, he's playing well. It's not like he's playing, awful. I mean, he's
Right.
shooting the ball well, like you said, um, getting a lot done there. So it just felt like at a certain point that the Knicks were going to do something because we had talked about it before when we were talking about the Knicks. I guess in the last few episodes, right, where we were saying like, the Knicks are solid, but they probably need to upgrade, if they want to, get to where they would like to go, right? And this is definitely, I think, an upgrade.
For sure.
It's going to be interesting to see, because it sounds like with Anunoby, he also wanted out to have a higher usage type role, right, where he's going to get more touches, he's going to be more
Hmm.
featured. So I'm curious to see if his game can handle that, where now all of a sudden he's a more featured part,
Yeah.
of the Knicks offense.
Because
Um,
historically, I'm not going to lie, I always thought he was one of those guys where it's like he has the impact on defense, but his impact on defense kind of makes it so he doesn't even need a lot of touches to be effective. So I don't know. That would be kind of interesting, like you said.
Yeah, because that's the thing is I think most people when they talk about him as like a 3 and D plus type player,
Hmm.
it's just you never really looked at him as like a great offensive player. Not that he's bad, right? But he's not. His offensive numbers don't really jump out on the page,
Agreed.
for the most part, right? I mean this season he's averaging 15 a game, 4 rebounds, 49 from the field, 37 from three, so that's good. Um, obviously he's just also on a bad team, so that doesn't help. Um, but either way, I mean, again, and then I guess, to kind of like a brief look at a couple of the other players, right? Say like Malachi Flynn. I mean, he's basically, I guess like a backup point guard.
Yeah.
I guess wasn't really doing a whole lot for the Raptors. I mean, he's okay, but he's just like it feels kind of Van Vlietish, right? Where like, you look at the numbers and it's like, 40%, 39% from the field. And then also even from three, like not a great outside shooter.
No.
So, probably not going to do a whole lot for the Knicks there. And then Precious Achua, right, is kind of interesting because he was drafted by Miami, right? He came in, it's pretty much like purely like an inside, undersized big man, right? 6'8", not really taking jump shots at all, right? For the Heat, right? But then all of a sudden he comes to Toronto and then flashes an outside game. The second year, 36 from three, and then after that he's been, back to 20 something percent from three.
Yeah.
So that's kind of not amazing, right? Where it's like, he's taking a lot more jumpers, but he's still not very good at it,
Right.
right? Hopefully, like for the Knicks, right, he kind of goes back to just being more of an inside guy. Since it doesn't seem like he's really, gonna really acquire a truly good jump shot.
Yeah.
So
I
if
think it's
he,
somebody to have alongside Hartenstein, that can stretch the
right,
floor somewhat, hopefully. But at the same time,
yeah,
like you
because that's
said, he's probably going to go back to the inside.
right, because that's the issue. Because you have, Hartenstein, who's mostly an interior guy, who actually I think when he first came into the league, kind of flashed, some jump shot
Hmm.
potential. And then Jericho Sims, pretty much strictly interior, right?
Yeah.
And then Precious Achua, you would think is kind of like the middle, intermediate type guy, but again, he's not really shot the ball that great. So we'll see. But either way, the main feature of this is Anunoby, right? If you're the Knicks, right? I think you're like you said, you're hoping to get something out of one of those guys.
Hmm.
Especially with Mitchell Robinson out, it would be nice to have more depth at that big man spot.
Yeah.
So if Precious Tua can actually, show something for the Knicks, that would be good. Um, but like I said, overall, I like it for both teams. I'm just curious to see what those two teams are going to do next because I think both of those teams have some other additional things that they could do. Right with the Raptors, we're assuming at this point that Siakam's going to get moved. I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I could be wrong, but I'm just like I think that that's something that they would like to probably do.
Yeah. I'm in
It's
that.
just a matter of what would they prefer to get back, right? Because clearly they were okay with not getting back first round picks for OG because you got back, some solid young players, right? So maybe they're kind of like trying to be like, oh, let's just try to compete. I mean, I don't think that that's what they're going to do. Like, I don't think they're still going to be that good of a team. Um, but either way, I like I said, I think you can't really complain, if you're either side. I think you should be pretty happy with it because again, if you're the Raptors, the worst thing that could have happened is you lose him in free agency for nothing, and then
Right.
you once again lost out on a guy who wasn't probably going to stay anyways. But this time you jumped ahead of the game and you got something back. So good on Toronto for doing that. And then like I said, for the Knicks, I think that they're going to hunt for some other pieces to help them out. Again, it
Have
sucks
to.
with Mitchell Robinson being out because that does hurt, but I still think that there's other things you can do around the margins to still make yourself a better team.
Agreed.
And then, I guess moving on, in other crazy news, right? So we're recording this, um, you know, um, the day before New Year's, right? So obviously it's a little bit different.
Yeah.
But before we actually got on, right? History was made where the Pistons finally ended up snapping, their losing streak. Ironically, it came against the Toronto Raptors, right?
Yeah.
That was the team, who had, because they had just made the trade, right? They were down a number of guys, right? And so now, they kind of went in a little shorthanded, right? Their best guys were still there, right? In Barnes and Siakam, but they ended up losing that game.
Yeah.
And for the most part, Toronto was up. Not Toronto. Detroit was up for pretty much the whole game, right? I think
Hmm.
they had a brief stretch where the Raptors kind of came back,
In the
and
third
had a
quarter, I think.
yeah, in the third quarter, but by and large, it was a wire to wire victory, for Detroit, right? I mean, Cade Cunningham once again led the way, right? 30 points, 12 assists, zero turnovers, right? Which is a great stat line. He's been definitely one of the bright spots, probably the only bright spot as of late for the Pistons, even when they were losing games. Um, I think you saw a lot of positive things from him, right? Like over the course of these last several games, right, where he's kind of trying to put the team on his back, kind of saying this is on me. We all want to win here, right? Kind of like taking the bullets for everybody. I
Yeah.
think that shows like some real, leadership qualities from him, and I think it kind of shows like, yeah, I don't think they made a mistake in terms of picking him, and I think he can be one of those guys that can help, lead your team. We'll see if he can be like the franchise guy, but I think he's got a lot of qualities about him that we've seen as of late. Um, and in all of these games, right, they've even shown like some stats where it's like when he's out there, I think they're like zero point 0.7 points positive or something like that, right? So they're barely positive, but again, you're not going to be positive when you've lost almost 30 games in a row.
Yeah.
And then when he's off the floor, they're like minus 37 or some crazy number like that. So I mean, you can see the imprint he left on his game, right? Jalen Duren, 18 and 17. Bogdanovich, right, with a great game, 19 and 7. Had some weird turnovers and missed free throws towards the end, but still. Kevin Knox starting, playing relatively well. Alec Burks, Jaden Ivey. So they got contributions from a lot of guys. Asor Thompson only playing 12 minutes, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Um, but either way, if you're Detroit, and the commentator, they mentioned, right, like, obviously it's still not great, in terms of the record, right? What are they 3-29 now?
Yeah.
But
That's
to get
rough,
a
bro.
win, yeah, but to get a win, that's the first step. That's the first step towards, improving. But they still got a ways to go. But again, like it's still shocking, like that they lost that many games in a row because it just feels like they have enough talent where like you could catch a team, at least a few times, and pull out more than 2, 3 wins, right? Like the Wizards, right? They recently won a game, right? I think can't
Brooklyn.
remember against the Nets, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
and that was the team that that beat the Pistons to give them that longest streak or whatever it was.
Yes.
So, I mean, and it was funny because we thought at some point that we knew they were going to win at some point, but we were thinking it was probably going to be against a good team where they just
Yeah.
kind of just catch on the wrong night. But it ended up being,
Not the
a team
case.
top it ended up being a team that's not very good either. That was also, missing, one of their guys. But I still feel like if you're the Raptors, you had enough to pull, that win out, right?
Yeah,
Like
no
there's other teams
excuse.
that stepped in there. There were other teams that stepped in there with less talent that were able to win. So it was just a pretty horrible loss if you're Toronto, but also indicative of like, yeah, like it makes sense that they needed to make a trade. So, but
Yeah,
either way, all the praise goes to Detroit for, winning this game. They almost gave it away towards the end.
yeah.
Just some senseless, silly stuff that kind of, shows why they lost so many games. But again, it's just that it it feels good if you're Detroit because again, and also it's cool that it's at home, right? It's the last game, of 2023, so you're able to close the year out with the win. So now I guess we'll see if they can build up a winning streak. I'm curious to see if they can win more than a couple of games in a row.
Right.
Maybe they pull it off. I mean, do you think they can pull it off?
Probably not. I know those Wingstop lines are going to be crazy though, but I don't think they're
And then
probably going to get a streak.
right, and then kind of just your thoughts, on the Detroit, situation with Cade Cunningham and all those guys,
Yeah.
in terms of like, what was your reaction to them, picking up their, the first win in a while.
Well, it's like you said, you love to see it. I don't think anybody really wishes a team to like lose, this much because it could be really demoralizing. You could see it
Yeah,
on the court, you could
I
see
was
it off the
watching.
court.
Yeah, I was watching their last several games, kind of like just watching, hoping that they would actually catch a win. Like they actually
Exactly.
made me interested in watching them, which is kind of interesting because you wouldn't think a team, that's 3-29 would really be worth watching.
Yeah, but like
But
whenever I've watched them, I mean, I could tell it's the tanking is not intentional. So they're actually just this bad, and like I'm just not sure what like the hot fix would be. Like, what could you do right now to kind of get some more wins? I would start with maybe putting Thompson back in the starting lineup. I know, like you said, Kevin Knox, he did have a good game. Jaden Ivey's somewhat of a better game. He just got a lot of his points from the free throw line. But I feel like they need to do something with the starting lineup. I would be intrigued if they do that. I think some guys definitely need to be moved at the deadline that absolutely have no value at the moment right now. I'm not going to say any names, but it's just it's tough because I don't know. I just don't think that one win. I know it feels good, but are we going to be talking about them again in a week where it's like they again they're not
they
winning in
lost
games
20.
anymore?
Yeah, did they lose 20 straight games
That
again? I don't know.
yeah, like that's the thing. Like I just don't know how long it's gonna last. But I know Detroit fans feel really good about the win because I think the thing is like the team itself, we know that they can't be that bad, right? Like looking at the roster, I think there is some talent there. Like you were saying, Cade Cunningham, I think is a talented player. I think Jaden Ivey can be a talented player at times. Duran we saw him. I thought he looked talented when I saw him in person. And it's like I don't know what happened. And some games they're in it, and some games they're just not.
Right.
But in this one, no excuse for the Raptors to lose it. First of all, second
Yeah.
of all, with Detroit, like what would you do right now today to make an adjustment to maybe win more games
Oh
internally?
my
Like
goodness.
maybe like lineup changes, scheme changes. What? Sorry to put you on the spot, but like, would you have a specific change that would maybe just give this team a little bit of an edge against other teams? I don't know.
I guess I'm just kind of surprised that say like Asor Thompson was playing so much earlier in the season and also playing well, and now his minutes have just completely, dropped off. I know, it's kind of hard, in that starting five because they have a couple of guys that aren't like, really like outside shooters or whatever, say
Right.
like Jalen Duren, we kind of saw him taking jump shots in the summer league. It hasn't translated, to the NBA regular season play
Right.
so far, right? And then, Jaden Ivey, I guess is fine at threes, right? But he prefers to have the ball in his hand. So maybe it just feels like it'd be kind of hard to have two guys in Thompson and Duren that are non-shooters out there. But it just feels like he's too talented to only play like 12 minutes, in a game and in a season where you've lost 28 in a row. Like,
Right.
but I think the main thing is that I think, like you said, once they get to the trade deadline, hopefully they can move some of those veteran guys, maybe like a Bogdanovich or somebody else, guys that are playing a lot, right? Because like some of those guys that they have on the team are veterans, but they're not playing a ton of minutes.
Right.
But say like somebody like Bogdanovich, who I'm sure is liked in the locker room a lot, but just somebody like that, so that way these young guys can have more opportunities, right? Because it's already kind of like a season where like you're not making the play-in,
Nope.
right? You're not competing for that.
Nope.
That's way out of the window now. So I think the main thing is you should prioritize the development of the young guys and play those guys. And then like because some of these other guys, it's just odd because it's like say like a Marcus Sasser, like he's not playing at all. He's a guy you just drafted, whereas like Killian Hayes is in the last year of his deal. Now, if you're planning on keeping Killian Hayes, okay, fine, but like, do we have evidence to really show that like Killian Hayes is a significantly better player than Marcus Sasser
No,
right now? Like,
no,
I don't think so. So I mean, that's something where it's like I think some of the guys that are better just are not playing right now. So I would
agreed.
probably start with that. As for the centers, I mean, Isaiah Stewart is out, so obviously that means that like one of Wiseman or Bagley is going to get more minutes. I think Bagley is hurt, if I'm not mistaken, right? So,
Yeah,
um,
he DNP'd this game, but yeah.
DNP'd. Oh, okay.
On
So that's not
ESPN, it says DNP for Bagley, Sasser, and Harris. So I don't know.
okay. So then I don't. So then that may not be an injury then.
Yeah,
So, if regardless, right? Like the guys that they're planning on keeping to me are the guys that they should play, right? Like you shouldn't be playing the other guys as much because again, like I'm just saying, like I don't feel like there's a huge discrepancy in talent between Killian Hayes and Marcus Sasser, right?
yeah,
Like I don't think like right now I think if Bagley is healthy, right? I don't know, but I'm assuming if he is healthy, right? He's right now a better player than James Wiseman,
agreed.
right? So I think you would probably want to play him more. But it's also just tough because it's just like I don't know. It just also feels like clearly the roster isn't as good as what some people may have thought
Hmm.
going into the season. But I think there, at the very least, those type of things are just ways to make it better. Like it just, I don't know. It just seems like the coaching staff is just kind of just going in there and just is like kind of, I don't want to say freelancing, but
That's
it's
what
just
it
been
looks like.
yeah, it's been rough. And again, like, the play has also not been amazing, but the last few games it has been better. Because even in the games where they lost the last couple, like they were there for like the entire game, right? Like it sucks, if you're playing Boston, you're up 20 at halftime and you lose the game in overtime. And then obviously, right, like that Nets game where they had a lead in the fourth and blew it. So it's been looking better, but I think there's a way for it to actually translate into getting more than 3 wins. Like, just I don't know. Like it still feels like a disappointment.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I don't know. The roster I really think is just bad. I think a lot of people who were high on it just jumped the gun a little bit. It's Detroit after all. They haven't been good for a very long time. I'm curious to see what they really do at the deadline because I think, and even in the offseason, I think there's a lot of pieces that need to go. Like you were talking about Killian Hayes, I think, he's probably either going to walk. Because I don't think they should re-sign him at this point. I just don't know. I haven't seen a lot from him. Although I will say the playmaking has somewhat gotten better, but there's still boneheaded turnovers, the
Yeah,
contested shots, and not to single him out, but I mean, he is one of the reasons like that the bench is really sorry. And then I just don't understand the Sore Thompson thing. Maybe they're like playing him cautiously. I don't know, but it is tough when a guy doesn't have a jump shot. It is
he just
hard to play somebody like that.
yeah, like is he sick? I don't
Yeah.
understand. Like, yeah, because that's the main thing. Like, yeah, maybe you could say Killian Hayes, like he's played at a level now where he shouldn't be out of the league. But it's like I don't think his future is in Detroit because I just
No.
feel like the guards that they have, I would prefer to have, right? Like I'd prefer to have Cade, I'd prefer to have Ivy, I'd prefer to have
Yes.
Sasser,
Yes.
all three of those guys over Hayes, and they're all basically point guards, right?
Yeah.
The only difference is Cade is a bigger point guard
Yeah.
at 6'7", 6'8", so he can play alongside another guard. But like, I don't know, I just feel like those other guys are better options.
For sure. I'm curious to see what they do with him because I think he came into the league with a lot of potential, coming from overseas and playing in France and Germany, all that stuff. But just doesn't pan out. And that's the unfortunate thing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, again, it's nice that if you're the Pistons that you were kind of able to pick, get some other guards, right? Like you got those other guys,
Yeah.
so that
Very
way,
fortunate.
but at the same time, like that's already an admission of yeah, we messed up with the Ivy or not Ivy, Hayes pick.
Because it wasn't Tyree. I think that was the Halliburton draft, if I'm not mistaken, right?
You mean with Killian Hayes? Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
That's wild. A lot of teams passed on him. It's
yeah.
interesting.
He was the seventh pick of the 2020 draft. So
That's crazy,
yeah,
man.
right after him, Obi Toppin, eh,
Yikes.
Denny Avdia,
Oh my
Jalen Smith,
gosh.
Devin Vassell, and then Tyrese Halliburton.
That's wild.
Yeah, so I mean, there were some picks like in the middle part of that lottery that were not amazing, which
Right.
is kind of the rough part. Because again, I think because again, the top of the draft, right? Edwards, awesome. Wiseman, and
Yeah.
then Lamelo Ball. He's Ball's been pretty good, just not able to stay healthy.
Sure.
Williams started off strong, then kind of sort of dropped off, and now he's been better as of late. But still, I
Hmm.
think for the fourth pick, I think he could have done better.
Yeah.
Okoro, just okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okongwu's good, but
Mm-hmm.
again, sixth I think is still,
That's a high.
kind
That's
of
high. It's an
Killian
overdraft for
Hayes.
sure.
Yeah, Killian Hayes. Yeah, Obi Toppin. I mean, the Knicks just gave him up for nothing.
Yeah.
Um, Denny Avdia, right? Fine. Jalen
Yeah.
Smith. Like all these guys are like okay. It's
Right.
just it was one of those drafts where it just feels like some of the talent was I think a little bit later, right? Like Halliburton, Vassell, Cole Anthony,
Yeah.
um, you know, I, Tyrese Maxey,
Oh yeah, that's
quick,
another one.
yeah, quickly, Jaden McDaniels. I mean, like, yeah, a lot of the talent just seems like it was in the latter part of the
Yeah.
draft. Sucks because again, like a lot of those guys just wouldn't have been projected to go like top five, right?
Yeah.
Like I think even though people liked Halliburton, he wasn't looked at as a top five pick,
No,
right?
he flew under
People,
the radar.
yeah, like people liked Devin Vassell. He wasn't looked at as a top five
Mm-mm.
pick. And then yeah, so that's the main thing. But, regardless, moving on. I mean, congratulations to the Pistons.
Yeah.
Still got a lot of work to do, but
Tons
hopefully the vibes in Detroit, get better because that was
for
pretty
sure.
rough. I mean, we were talking about it. I mean, they hadn't won a game since October, right? And
Yeah.
we're now right at the end of December, so it was basically 2 months of
Yeah.
just
Hey, at
complete
least they
losing.
got a win in 2023 though.
Yeah, so congratulations. I don't remember how many they won from like January to April of last season. Probably not a ton,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
so, again, congratulations.
For sure.
Um, so now, we're gonna move into the news rumor stuff. It's pretty minimal at this point, right? Obviously, we had the trade that happened, so a lot of the stuff that we talked about before, still kind of ties into the Knicks, where stuff about OG, right? Like, say, him, obviously, like planning on re-signing. Again, assuming it all works out, that makes
Mhm.
a lot of sense.
Mhm.
The Raptors looking to be a more competitive team, right, as opposed to completely rebuilding. Again, every time a team says that and trades away their best players, they are rebuilding. They are not competing.
Exactly.
Um, but regardless, I mean, the Raptors haven't been good with their best players, but so I mean, I can't imagine they would trade away their best players and then all of a sudden become a better, more competitive roster.
No.
Um, but either way, regardless, it makes sense because I think that core had run its course. Just build around Scotty
Yep.
Barnes, find young guys to pair with him. Clearly, he seems like he's the real deal. He's bounced back after
Yes.
you know not a great second year.
Yeah, they were guarding
Where
him like Ben Simmons last year, and now he's hitting step back threes.
yeah, exactly. No, I mean, unfortunately, he didn't do much, against Detroit this
Uh,
game.
yeah.
Most of it came late, but
Sure.
regardless, either way, yeah, that's the guy to build around. He's clearly proven, that he's, a legit star in the making. So, I
Mhm.
mean, I think Toronto did really good with that pick.
Yeah.
And hopefully at some point we'll see some more out of Grady Dick, maybe, because
Yeah,
again, he
that's
hasn't done
wild.
a whole,
He
yeah, 'cause
DMP'd that game.
because he hasn't really done a whole lot. Maybe he's just not very good. I don't know, but I mean,
That's
um,
wild. He was good
yeah,
in
we'll see.
college, but just because you're good in college does not mean you're good in the NBA. That is a fact.
Yeah, and then for news, rumor stuff, pretty much like like I said, pretty much a light sprinkling of stuff, right? Say Wiggins' contract is no longer a major barrier to trade, right? Tim Kawakami of the Athletic, right? He basically is saying, that just because they gave him an extension, that doesn't mean that they wouldn't be okay with trading him. Which again, I think makes a lot of sense because he's not played very well this year.
Mhm.
He's coming off the bench, and even though I guess in some games he's been a little better, right? Like he's still not playing amazing. Like he has like a solid game every once in a while, but I mean, he's still averaging like 12 points, 4 rebounds, 43 from the field, 29 from three. Um, so it's just not good enough numbers, I think, and it's just hard because it's kind of like what we mentioned with the Lakers, where you got some expensive guys coming off the bench, and that just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Um,
Yeah.
right now, like they changed their starting five again. Against the Dallas Mavericks, right, where I think Pajemski is coming off the bench, right, and then Trace Jackson Davis is starting, right. They're still losing, so I mean, like it, again, like again, it's the third quarter, so things may change, but regardless, um, I don't know. It just seems so odd. I just don't know what happened to him because again, like we already talked about it 100,000 times, right? He was the second best player the year they won the title.
Mhm.
The swing piece for them against the Celtics, Boston, I'm sure is probably angry now, right? Because if this was the Wiggins that we had seen,
Oh my God.
Celtics, yeah, I think the Celtics would have won that
Yeah, that would
series.
have been an obliteration.
And that's the weird part, because for a good chunk of his career, right, like the biggest knock on him that everybody had was, where's the motor? How motivated is he? Right? Because, you could see the talent, but it just felt like, he had kind of plateaued as a player.
In the
For
stories
the
from
last
Jimmy.
yeah, yeah, the stories from Jimmy Butler didn't help, and then he goes to Golden State, and then essentially for 1 year, right? I mean, I think he had flashed improved play, when they first traded for him. They just weren't that good. But then like the one season, where they win the title, right? He ends up being one of the biggest factors, and then
Yeah.
last year, right? The stats weren't bad, right? They were very similar, but the impact it just felt like was lower.
And he
Obviously
missed
he
a
was
chunk of time. Yeah.
and he missed a chunk of time. But this year he's played. He's been relatively healthy. I know reportedly he came into the season, out of shape, right?
Ooh.
So that doesn't help. But again, like we're at the end of December, and it's like, where are you, dude? Because again, like they won 4 or 5 in a row, but now they're starting to go back on a losing streak again, playing some better teams. So it's like it would kind of help if you were here,
Yeah.
helping them. I think he was good against Denver, but again, he just hasn't been great this season. And
Yeah.
again, he's definitely no longer untouchable. I don't know if he ever was, but clearly like there was a commitment level when they gave him that extension. But now he's at a point where yeah, like he's definitely not untouchable. Like I said, I don't know what the easy answer for Golden State is. I mean, we've already talked about they need some more size, they need a secondary consistent offensive option, but then it's like, if I'm another team, right, since Wiggins is on a long-term deal, if he's playing like this, right, like why would I even want him? You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like if he was in the last year of his deal where you could kind of just trade for him and then just kind of like if he plays well, you can re-sign him or you can just cut loose if it doesn't work out. But he's on a long-term contract,
Yeah. You'd have to be
which is
committed.
fairness. I guess in fairness, it's less money than what he was making before, but still, like I don't know. I mean, we'll see. Because again, we've asked that question a lot of times from a lot of teams, and a lot of these teams still end up pulling things off. But
Yeah.
I don't know. It's been a tough year for him because, again, he had, some, it felt like he had turned the corners, after winning the title, but now it just seems like he's regressed the worst way, right? This is his worst NBA season.
Which is
And he's
wild.
yeah, and he's not even he's 28. He's gonna be 29, I think, within the next couple of months. But I mean, like this is by far his worst NBA season, right? Like I know people talked about, what he was like in Minnesota, but like at least he was still putting up like some numbers. But like now the numbers are bad, the impact is bad. Like he's just a bad NBA player right now.
Yeah, and that's wild. I just think it's an anomaly. We'll probably never get the answer. I just really hope that he does find a way to turn it around this year or the next. Because I mean, I don't know. The next might be a little bit too late because he might be on a different squad, and I'm sure it wouldn't be a squad that has a lot of contending years like Golden State. I don't think a contender would be buying for Andrew Wiggins right now. So I think it would probably be a scrub team, unfortunately. But regardless, I'm not sure what he could do to pick up the play because I don't know what the issue is. That's the problem. Like we don't know if it's a mental thing, could be a physical thing. I doubt it's a physical thing because if it was a physical thing, I think Golden State would be talking about it and would give the pretext so he wouldn't be getting flamed by NBA Twitter every time he has a bad game. So it's like I don't know what what the answer to their problems are because he's just not their only problem. There's tons of
Yeah,
problems, but Wiggins
right.
is
Because even
definitely one of them. He's might be their
right,
biggest.
yeah, because even in some of the games where he's played well, they still haven't won a lot of
Right.
those games. That's the other issue, right? Because like you said, there's more problems than that, but he may be one of the biggest. Because again, like we talked about, him and Clay not playing well, and I thought he was playing much worse than Clay
Right.
um, during that really ugly stretch of the season. But now again, it's still not been great. So
Yeah, it has
we'll
not
see
been
what
pretty.
happens. But I mean, I guess, do you have a gut feeling that they end up actually trading him, or do you think that like there's just a way for him to kind of just work it out and then eventually work his way back into the starting five? Like, what do
I
you think
mean,
happens? Gut reaction.
like right as of right now, I would probably say as of right now, yeah, I would probably say he's going to get traded. I just don't think there's really a pathway forward for him. The benching is one thing, but to be benched and still kind of just play meh and not really show the improvement because I don't know how many weeks it's been since he's been moved to the bench. I'm thinking maybe like 2, 3,
Yeah,
but
it's been a little bit because I think we started talking about it right when Draymond was out, right? I
yes,
think
you're right.
so. Whenever that was, I think that was last month, right?
Yeah,
Like in
so
November.
that's
I think
about
it was
4 weeks.
was it was it November or was it early December?
Either way, it's pretty much 4 weeks. So, through 4 weeks of him being on the bench, he hasn't really done a whole lot, and hasn't improved too much. So, yeah, I think he's probably going to be out of there. It's just who's really going to buy for him. That would be the question. But I'm sure somebody's going to be dumb enough to do it.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I don't really understand it because it just doesn't make any sense. Because I mean, again, I know that he's a guy that had taken some some hits earlier in his career, but it
For
really
sure.
did feel like he kind of was turning it around. But
He looked
unfortunately,
legit. He was an
that
all-star that year.
yeah, like yeah, exactly. You're right because and not just an all-star, he was an all-star starter
Yeah,
actually. So that lets you know like he was playing
he was
really,
tough.
really well. And yeah, and Golden State, as a result, was also playing really, really well. So yeah, that's got to change because again, if it doesn't, then Golden State's going to continue to slide.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, yeah, if you look at his stats as a starter compared to a reserve, right? Starter 12 points, 4 rebounds and assists, 41, 28, 63. As off the bench, 14 and a half, 4.5, 1.7, 48, 37, 87. So I guess he's playing better as a reserve, for sure. But again, yeah, so he's played 6 games as a reserve.
Okay. But like, I just don't think it's translated to the success that they're hoping for. I don't know. It's just such
Right.
a weird
Well, like you said,
anomaly.
there's other factors as well. It's not
Sure.
just, him. It's as a whole, like everything's just kind of just falling apart.
Yeah.
It's other guys, right? Like Looney's not played great, right?
Hmm.
That's why he got benched, right? Clay wasn't playing that well. He didn't get benched, right? But there were, his minutes went down a little bit at times. So it's a lot of different things. So I think some changes are coming from that team. Like I said, I'm not gonna, just predict who's gone. Like I
Right.
said, I don't think any of the core guys, right? I think it would be more likely to be like a Wiggins or a Chris Paul or maybe even like one of those other guys like Kaminga or Moody, I think.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah. Well, that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, as we talked about, we're going to be setting up our Discord, at some, beginning next year, right? Probably within the first month or so. So when that's set up, we'll let in these podcasts, so that way you can join. We'll have a lot of content, because we're going to build a community. So continue, to support that. Let us know in the comments, your thoughts on, the OG and Obi trade, and Detroit, finally snapping their losing streak, right? And again, if you comment, we will, read it, at the beginning of, our next episode. We continue to appreciate all this like and support, love and support, like and subscribe.
Yeah.
And
Happy
like,
New Year,
yeah,
everybody, too.
again, happy New Year, right? Obviously, we're recording this before the new year, but you'll see it,
Yeah.
once the new year starts. So, here's to a great 2024.